Merry meet, Annie here with our continuing exploration of the season of Mabon. We're going to talk a little bit about Hades and Persephone today. What story do you know of Hades and Persephone? I know the one that I knew as a child when I was studying mythology, and it's actually the one I hung on to pretty well into my adult life. Persephone is a dear, sweet maiden who's kind of tra-la-laing along, and she picks flowers on a beautiful spring day, and then, roaring in on his chariot, or sometimes roaring up through the earth itself, comes Hades, dark and threatening, and he takes the maiden, and as stories will say, abducted her, well, not before doing some less than honorable things with her. I'm not laughing at that because it's funny. I'm laughing at it because that is the story that we're told. What if that's not the story? And I think it's not the story, because I think we learn from the stories told about Persephone in the Underworld that in that abduction, she became queen not just of the Underworld, but of herself. She became sovereign and powerful and sure. Oh, maybe the kernel of those possibilities existed her into the little lovely maiden dancing through the sunshine and the flowers. But she did not come into her power until she entered the Underworld. Yeah, that would connect to some of that maybe, maybe not mythology about Mabon. He had to go into the darkness, face the challenges, and be loved in a new way before he could become whole unto himself. And the stories of Persephone in the Underworld are not of a shrinking person. It's someone who assumes responsibility and power, and in fact, very equal power to her consort. I attended, I guess it's been a year ago or so, a wonderful presentation that Wendy Rule gave. Maybe it was a little over a year ago. She visited us at Sealy Court, which is the home covenstead for the Assembly of the Sacred Wheel here in Delaware. And she was getting towards completion of her new CD, Persephone. And it was a gathering, surprisingly, with only maybe 30 people. A lot of conversation and sharing, and Wendy was amazing. And I hung on to every word because in the years I have explored what being a woman and therefore intimately connected to the female divine for that, I started feeling Persephone very differently. Not as someone who was raped, abducted, and taken away against her will, but someone who, the feminine hero, who had to be something and do something in order to serve the purpose of their life. And I started finding versions of the mythology for Persephone, sometimes older than the classical Greek times, where she wasn't a victim, where she was powerful and came into her power because of her journey into the Underworld. And I was seeking out, trying to find more and more of that. And I built my own story about that, by the way, not finding too many others that saw her the same way at the time. But in the last decade, I found more and more men and women who were seeing this particular story differently. Well, then along comes Wendy, and her entire new CD is based on the beautiful, horrible story of Persephone. And it is indeed the Persephone that I had always had a relationship with, at least in my mature adult years. A woman of power and substance who almost reluctantly came back from the Underworld each spring because she knew she had to. Her hero's journey was she had to return in order for there to be a reblossoming of the world. It was a duty and a responsibility, but it felt more to me that her true home was at Hades' side. And Wendy's story of Persephone is pretty much that. She added one new thing to me, though, to consider. And I got to tell you, that woman is amazing. I couldn't wait for the CD to come out. It's a powerful piece of work in the poetry, the lyrics, and in Wendy's presentation of the many voices, literally, of Persephone. Anyway, we were talking about the fact that the classical mythology story has her being raped and abducted. And Wendy said something that surprised me at first, which is, I didn't want to believe that happened. But it's an important part of her story. And an important part of all of us understanding who of us is Persephone. Her point was that some of the greatest changes in our lives are forced upon us. We have no choice. Something that comes out of the view, some terrible experience, some great loss, some great suffering. It happens. We didn't volunteer for it. We weren't going to go in that direction unless we were forcibly taken in that direction by our life. Now, Wendy wasn't so sure about the whole rape aspect of the relationship with Hades. She, like me, saw that Hades treated her with such amazing respect in their relationship that more than likely wouldn't be part of how we would see the mythology. But she shared how important it was that Persephone's abduction be sudden, unexpected, and verging on the violent. Him showing up suddenly and grabbing her and taking her away and taking her into the underworld. She said one of the things we can learn from this story is those kinds of things happen to us in life. The absolutely unexpected and terrible things that happen. And then, what happens in us in response to that? Often, an understanding of life's purpose which is stronger, a strength of character, the ability to endure, sometimes the ability to know who we are more than we knew before going through some terrible trial of life that we're presented with. So Wendy added back into my story of Persephone, which was kinder and gentler by far than the not so ancient, more the classical versions of the story of her and Hades. I made it a little kind in the way I looked at it. Well, I probably have reasons as a woman and as an abused woman and rape survivor not to want to go there. But Wendy said, consider the power of her abduction. And at this time of the year, this is the season of Mabon, consider the times in your life that you faced an abduction, an abrupt change, unwanted in your life, and how your life was changed from that moment on. And she encouraged us in the conversations we were having to not then dwell on that as a, well, oh, poor me, terrible things happened to me and I was never the same after that. Well, because that's a given. But some of the things that happen in our life that are the most important, we weren't willing accomplices to when they happened. And yet there's a direction to our life that grew from who we were in the face of those challenges or who we became later in dealing with the aftermath. That's a great part of who we were. Have you ever reconsidered the story of Hades and Persephone? I did first in not seeing Persephone as victim and seeing her as extremely powerful in her role in the underworld and her choice to return because she knew it was her life's calling to return each spring. And then I added to that considerations the last year or two since this time that Wendy was here. Abduction as a spiritual experience. Life goes along and then something suddenly changes us forever. And the lessons are in who we were and who we became after that experience. So this is offered for your consideration of the season of Mabon, yet another journey for you to take. I had a question from someone in, I don't even remember if it was Seeker or Dedicant, our current programs on Patreon, and they were talking about, we were doing something and they said that it felt like shadow work. And I made a comment at the time that I don't even know if I've actually put this into words before, but shadow work isn't something that happens in the dark time of the year. It's not something we journey into. Mabon or Samhain. We don't set about to do our shadow work. You might disagree with me on that. Instead, there are opportunities throughout the length of our life to experience shadow, to see where it takes us, willingly or not, and who we are on the other side of that experience. Yes, we can choose moments, intentional moments, to sit with the shadow. Dark moon's a lovely opportunity for that. The dark time of the year, lovely opportunity for that. But we don't set about the big declaration that I am about to do, shadow work. Shadow work happens to us. It's the abduction, my friends. It's not something we can seek out as powerfully as the way it seeks us out and who we become because of the experience. And we're entering a time of year when these are the kinds of thoughts that just might cause us to stop and consider. I wish you all mirth, celebrating who you are, and reverence, celebrating how you got to be who you are. Merry part.